She was 8 years old the day she found him. He was sitting at the base of a grapefruit tree at the edge of the outer forest, past the settlement boundary, in the rain. He had a pack with a broken strap held together with a cord that was not going to hold much longer. He had a map that was clearly wrong in a way that he clearly knew it was wrong, because he was not looking at it anymore. He was sitting with the map folded on his knee and his hand on his forehead, and the specific expression of someone who has made a series of reasonable decisions that have produced an unreasonable outcome and has arrived at the point of accepting this. He was very large. He was taller than her father and broader than her uncle, and his hair was wet from the rain, and his boots were the kind of boots that had not been designed for the outer forest's route terrain, which was why he was sitting rather than walking. Saya stood at the tree line and looked at him. She had been following the sound of something moving through the outer forest for 20 minutes, which she had been told not to do, and which she had done anyway, because the sound was not an animal sound. Animals in the outer forest moved with a specific economy of motion that produced a specific sound pattern. Whatever was making this sound was moving inefficiently, which meant it was either hurt or lost. And if it was hurt, she wanted to know what kind of hurt, and if it was lost, she wanted to know who. It was a human. She had seen humans before 3 times in the settlement when the survey teams came through. They were always very large, and they always looked at the grapefruit trees the way people looked at things that were bigger than they had expected. She understood this. The grapefruit trees were bigger than most things. This one looked at her the way people looked at things that surprised them in a way they were not sure how to interpret. He went very still. She understood that too. She went still when she encountered things she was not sure about, until she had enough information to know what to do next. She said in Yavari, "You are lost." He said something in Concord common that she did not understand. His tone was careful, which she noted. People who were frightened sometimes sounded careful when they were trying not to be frightened. People who were careful were easier to work with than people who were frightened. She said in Yavari, because the only other option was silence, "I know the way back to the settlement. I will take you." He did not understand her. She could tell from his face that he did not understand her, but she could also tell from his face that he understood something of what she meant, which was the thing that words were for when words were not shared. Meaning could sometimes travel farther than vocabulary. She turned toward the path and took 3 steps and looked behind her. He stood up, his pack strap held. He followed. His name was Eden Hale. He was 22 years old, and he had been on Vethyava for 4 days as part of a 3-person geological mapping team that was conducting a preliminary mineral survey of the outer ridge system. He had been told to stay on the designated path. He had stayed on the designated path for 3 days. On the 4th day, his sensor array had picked up a mineral signature 40 meters off the path that was interesting enough to be worth a look, and he had gone to look at it, and the look had taken longer than he anticipated, and he had returned to where he was certain the path was, and the path was not there. He had been walking for 2 hours. He had been walking in what he was increasingly certain was the wrong direction for at least half of that time. His map was a survey approximation rather than a detailed topographical chart, and the outer forest route terrain had a way of making distances deceptive that his 2 days of experience with it had not fully prepared him for. He was not panicking. He was, however, aware that the rain was intensifying and that the forest canopy, which had been managing the rain into something navigable, was becoming less effective at this as the rainfall increased, and that wet route terrain after dark was not a situation he wanted to be in. And then there was a Yavari child standing at the tree line looking at him. She was small. Yavari children were built more lightly than human children at the same age, with larger eyes and a stillness of posture that humans tended to read as solemnity, and that was not exactly solemnity. He would learn later, but was something in the neighborhood of it. She had been watching him for long enough to have made some assessment of him, and the assessment appeared to have produced a conclusion, because she spoke. He did not understand the words, but the tone was matter-of-fact in a way that was oddly reassuring. And then she turned and walked 3 steps and looked back at him. He understood that. He stood up and followed. Yep. The walk out of the forest took 1 hour and 40 minutes. She did not walk fast. She walked at a pace that he could match on the route terrain with his inadequate boots, which he understood was a deliberate accommodation, and which he found, in the specific emotional state of someone who has been lost and has been found, quietly remarkable. She checked behind her every few minutes, not nervously, not as if she expected him to be gone, but with the methodical quality of someone who has taken on a task and intends to complete it correctly. He followed the checking. When she looked back, he raised a hand, not a wave exactly, more a confirmation. Here, still here. She would turn back to the path. Somewhere in the second half of the walk, when the rain had eased and the canopy was managing it again, and his boots had found a rhythm with the roots, he reached into his pack. He had a sister. Her name was Myra, and she was 9 years old, and he had been writing her letters from every posting he had taken since he was 18. And the letters were the kind of letters that contained the small, precise details of new places rather than the large impressions. Because Myra was 9 and 9-year-olds were interested in specific things. What did the trees smell like? How big were the animals? Could you eat anything there? Was it cold? He knew how 9-year-olds received information, because he had been talking to one for 4 years. He knew how 8-year-olds undertook tasks. He knew it because of Myra, who undertook tasks with a specific gravity that was the most serious thing he had ever encountered, and which he had learned to treat with the seriousness it deserved. He had 2 notebooks in his pack. One was the survey notebook, data, readings, the mineral signature that had started this whole situation. The other was a personal notebook, small, with a green cover where he wrote things for himself, notes about places, observations, drafts of the letters to Myra. He tore out the pages with survey data. He kept those. He held out the rest of the notebook. She had stopped to check on him when he reached into the pack. She was looking at him with the careful attention of someone who was processing an unexpected development. He held the notebook out, not pushing it toward her, holding it at the distance from which she could take it or not take it without any pressure in either direction. She took it with both hands. He did not know why he had done it exactly. He knew that it was right in the way that some things were right without requiring a justification. She was leading him out of a forest. She was 8 years old. She had checked on him 12 times. The notebook was the only thing in his pack that was worth giving. She looked at the notebook. She looked at him. She put it carefully in the front pouch of her carry sack, the way you put something you intended to keep. Then she turned back to the path. She brought him to the settlement boundary at dusk. The settlement of Kailmora was visible through the trees, lights, and the smell of the evening meal, and the sound of the settlement going about its evening. And standing at the boundary were 2 adults, one of whom was her mother and one of whom was a man from the survey team who had realized Eden was missing and had gone to the settlement to ask for help. Eden's survey team colleague, a woman named Patel who had been with the geological mapping program for 6 years, and who had a very specific expression for when junior colleagues had done exactly what they had been told not to do, looked at him, and then at the child standing beside him. She said, "Please tell me you did not let an 8-year-old rescue you from the outer forest." He said, "I did not let her, she found me." Patel said, "That is not the distinction you think it is." He said, "No, it is exactly the distinction I think it is." Saya's mother had come to the boundary with the specific expression of someone who has been managing the dual emotion of worry about a child and confidence in that child, and who has arrived at the resolution of both simultaneously. She spoke to Saya in Yavari. Eden did not understand the words. He understood the tone, which was the tone of a parent who has received a child back and is deciding whether the occasion called for relief first or a conversation about boundaries first. Saya said something in return. Her tone was the tone of someone who has done the right thing and is prepared to have the conversation about boundaries afterward. Her mother looked at Eden. She said in accented but clear Concord common, "She says you were lost." He said, "Yes." She says you followed well." He looked at Saya. He said, "She checked on me. I wanted to make sure I gave her something to check on." Saya's mother translated this. Saya listened. She looked at Eden with the careful assessment she had been applying to him since the tree line. She said something in Yavari. Her mother said, "She says you are welcome at Kailmora. She says you should get better boots." Patel, beside him, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said, "Tell her thank you. Tell her I will remember the way she checked." He left Vethyava 6 days later. The survey team's work was complete, the mineral data filed, the geological report submitted. The Yavari homeworld was catalogued in his personal records the way all the places he had worked were catalogued, not just the survey data, but the specific texture of the place, the things that the data did not capture. The way the grapefruit trees smelled in the rain, the pattern of the canopy light in the late afternoon, the sound the outer forest made when it was quiet. And a Yavari child, 8 years old, walking ahead of him on the route path, checking behind her every few minutes to make sure he was still there. He wrote a letter to Myra from the transit vessel. He told her about the grapefruit trees and the rain and the mineral signature that had started the whole situation. He told her about the notebook. He told her that he had given his personal notebook to an 8-year-old alien child who had walked him out of a forest, because it was the right thing to do, and that the child had put it in her carry sack the way you put something you intended to keep. Myra wrote back 3 weeks later. She said, "I think you did the right thing. I think you should have given her the survey notebook too. I think the trees sound like the trees behind Grandma's house." He kept the letter. 30 years is a long time. In 30 years, Eden Hale went from junior survey technician to senior field researcher to operations director to fleet liaison to, through a sequence of appointments and postings and situations that he had not planned, and that the Concord had decided he was suited for, admiral of the Outer Corridor Survey and Liaison Division. It was not the career he had imagined at 22. It was the career that had happened while he was paying attention to the work. He was good at the work. He had always been good at the work, the careful documentation, the precise reports, the habit of reading the full brief rather than the summary, the instinct for which details in a field report contained information that the standard categories did not adequately represent. He had the quality of someone who understood that the difference between adequate and accurate was usually small in the short term and significant over time. He had also, over 30 years, developed the specific kind of memory that came from doing work that required remembering, not just facts, but the texture of situations, the places, the people. He remembered all of them. That was not something he thought of as unusual. It was something he thought of as the minimum. The distress request arrived on a Thursday. It was not a distress call in the immediate sense, not a live signal, not a crisis in progress. It was a formal request from the Yavari Homeworld Council, submitted through the Concord's Diplomatic Assistance Framework, requesting support for what the request classified as an ecological emergency. A cascading failure in the Yavari Forest Systems route network, caused by a mineral extraction operation that had been approved under a treaty framework that had been designed for a different scale of extraction, and which was now producing subsidence effects in the route network that the Yavari's own ecological engineers could not reverse without specialist assistance. The request had been in the diplomatic assistance queue for 11 days when Eden read it. It had been classified as a low-priority technical assistance request on the basis that it described an ecological rather than a humanitarian emergency, that the Yavari homeworld was not in the primary corridor network, and that the specialist assistance required geological engineering and root system remediation. was a niche capability set that the Concord standard response framework did not have on rapid deployment. Low-priority technical assistance, review in the next cycle. The next cycle was 6 weeks. Eden was reading the queue on a Thursday morning because he had been reading queues on Thursday mornings for 22 years. Since the year, he had been posted to his first administrative command and had learned that the queue was where things went when no one had decided they were important yet. He read the request, he read the technical appendix, he read the name of the planet. He sat for a moment. Then he picked up his communication terminal and placed a call to the Concord's Geological Engineering Reserve roster. The reserve roster was a list of retired and civilian-adjacent specialists who had indicated willingness to take contract assignments for the Concord's Technical Assistance Program. It was not heavily used, the program's budget was modest, and its administrative process was slow in AUG. That many requests resolved through other channels before the roster was activated. Eden had never used it before. He used it now. He called the roster coordinator, a young civilian administrator named Shen who had been managing the list for 2 years and who received, on an average Thursday, approximately no calls from admirals. And he said, "I need to know who on the reserve roster has geological engineering experience with planetary root network remediation, specifically mineral subsidence causation." Shen said, "I will need to check the specialty flags. That is a fairly specific category." Eden said, "I know. Check it carefully. Cross-reference anyone with Yavari homeworld experience if that flag exists." Shen said, "I do not think that flag exists." Eden said, "Then check for outer corridor forest system geology. Take whatever time you need. I will hold." Shen checked. It took 11 minutes. He came back with 3 names. Eden said, "Contact all 3. Today. Tell them this is a time-sensitive request and that I am personally requesting their availability. Use my name and my office designation." Shen said, "Admiral, the standard request process." Eden said, "Takes 6 weeks. I know. We do not have 6 weeks. The root network failure is cascading, which means every week we wait is geometry. I need the 3 names contacted today." Shen said, "Yes, Admiral." Eden said, "Thank you, Shen. Do it now, please." He spent the rest of Thursday morning on the request file. He read the full geological assessment the Yavari had included in the appendix, not the executive summary, the full assessment, which was 41 pages of Yavari geological engineering documentation that had been translated into Concord Common by someone whose Concord Common was technically adequate and scientifically precise, and which required 3 separate looks at the terminology glossary before the technical argument became fully clear. The argument, once clear, was this: the root network was the structural foundation of the Yavari forest system, and the Yavari forest system was not decorative. It was the atmospheric and hydrological regulator for 40% of the homeworld's habitable land surface. The settlements, including Kailmora, including dozens like it, sat within the forest system. Their water came from it. Their air quality was managed by it. The people who lived in the settlements were not in danger today. They would be in danger in 8 to 14 months if the cascade was not reversed, because that was the timeline the Yavari engineers had calculated for the subsidence to reach the depth that would compromise the root network's regulatory function. 8 to 14 months. The Concord's low-priority queue had a 6-week review cycle. After the review, if the request was upgraded, the specialist procurement process began. That process took, on average, 4 months for niche capability sets. 4 months plus 6 weeks was over 5 months. Against an 8-month lower bound, that left less than 3 months of working time before the lower bound of the crisis window. 3 months for geological engineering and root network remediation that the Yavari's own specialists had assessed as requiring at minimum 5 months of active intervention. He understood the numbers the way you understood numbers that described a gap between what was possible and what was needed. Then he started closing the gap. He wrote a memo to the Diplomatic Assistance Program Director. It was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a technical summary of the geological situation and its timeline, reference to the Yavari Assessment Appendix. The second paragraph was a timeline analysis demonstrating the inadequacy of the standard queue process given the cascade rate. The third paragraph was a request for emergency reclassification of the Yavari request to time-sensitive technical assistance with immediate specialist procurement authorization. The memo was 2 pages. It contained no language that was not necessary and no argument that was not supported by the documents it cited. It was the kind of memo that the program director, a Concord civilian administrator named Voss who had been managing diplomatic assistance for 14 years, would recognize as the kind that did not leave room for a response that was not a decision. Voss read the memo within 2 hours. He sent a reply that said, "Reclassification approved. Procurement authorization attached. Please confirm the reserve roster contacts." Eden replied, "Confirmed. Shen has the names. All 3 are being contacted today." 2 of the 3 reserve roster specialists were available. One was a geological engineer named Dr. Renata, who had spent 12 years working on outer corridor planetary remediation, and who said yes before Shen had finished explaining the situation. The other was a root system specialist named Dr. Akafer, who had written 3 papers on forest system subsea. Dents and who said, "I have been waiting for someone to call about Vethyava for 2 years. Yes, when do we leave?" Eden received the confirmation from Shen on Thursday afternoon. He sent deployment authorization on Thursday evening. He also sent a personal communication to the Yavari Homeworld Council. It was not a standard administrative acknowledgement. It was a direct message, in Concord Common, from his personal office designation rather than his administrative one, and it said, "I have reviewed your assistance request in full. 2 specialist teams will be deployed to Vethyava within the week. Dr. Renata leads geological engineering. Dr. Akafer leads root system remediation. Both have reviewed your assessment appendix and confirmed the cascade is reversible with early enough intervention." He wrote, "I want the council to know that this request reached me directly. I know your homeworld. I was on Vethyava 30 years ago. I know what the forest means to the people who live in it. I should have found your request sooner. I am finding it now." The response from the Yavari Homeworld Council came the following morning. It was formal in its opening, the appropriate diplomatic language of acknowledgement and gratitude. Then it said something that was not standard diplomatic language. It said, "Admiral Hale, we have searched our records for your visit 30 years ago. The geological survey of the Outer Ridge System, year 47 of the current Concord calendar. We found the team manifest. We found your name." It said, "We also found a record from the settlement of Kailmora. The settlement elder at that time logged an incident from the same week as your survey. A junior survey technician became lost in the outer forest. He was found and guided out by a child of the settlement." It said, "The child's name was Saya. She is 38 years old now. She is the lead ecological engineer for the Kailmora Settlement District. She is one of the engineers who identified the cascade failure and submitted the original assessment that became our assistance request." It said, "We have told her your name. She asks us to tell you that she still has the notebook." Eden read the message twice. He sat at his desk for a moment with the specific quality of someone who has just received information that requires sitting with before it can be processed. Then he opened a response. He wrote, "Please tell Dr. Saya that I have thought about that notebook many times in 30 years. I have thought about the way she put it in her carry sack. I have thought about the way she checked behind her on the path. I want her to know that I followed carefully. I have been following carefully ever since." He sent it. Then he went back to the deployment authorization and added a line to Dr. Renata's briefing packet in the section on local consultation resources. The line said, "Your primary contact in the Kailmora Settlement District is Dr. Saya, lead ecological engineer. She has been working this problem longer than anyone. Consult her first. She knows the forest." Dr. Renata and Dr. Akefer arrived on Vethyava 11 days after the deployment authorization. Saya met them at the settlement of Kailmora. She was 38 years old, and she had the specific quality of someone who had grown up in a forest and understood it the way you understood something you had been inside your whole life. Not theoretically, but physically, in the way the root terrain felt underfoot, and the way the canopy changed with the rain, and the way the grapefruit trees communicated with each other through the network that was now failing. She showed them the subsidence sites. She showed them the assessment data she had been compiling for 2 years, longer than she had been working on the formal request, because she had known the cascade was coming before the cascade was visible to anyone else, and she had been building the documentation that would be necessary when it finally became undeniable. Dr. Akafer, on the second day, said, "This is the most thorough pre-failure documentation I have encountered in 20 years of remediation work. How did you know it was coming?" Saya said, "I grew up here. I know what the forest sounds like when it is healthy. It stopped sounding that way 3 years ago. I started writing it down." Dr. Akafer said, "You wrote it down for 3 years before the cascade was confirmed." Saya said, "The writing did not depend on confirmation. The thing was true whether it was confirmed or not. It was worth writing precisely." Dr. Akefer looked at her. She said, "Someone told me that once, or something close to it. I think of it often." The remediation work took 7 months. 7 months of geological intervention. Injection wells to counter the subsidence, root network support structures, mineral stabilization along the extraction corridor, and a renegotiation of the extraction treaty that Saya had been preparing documentation for. In parallel with the remediation, and which she presented to the Concord's Treaty Review Board with the same precision she had brought to the pre-failure documentation. The treaty renegotiation took 4 months after the remediation. The revised framework included a root network impact monitoring requirement, a cascade threshold trigger that automatically suspended extraction operations if subsidence exceeded defined parameters, and a specialist response commitment from the Concord that obligated a response timeline of 8 weeks maximum for Yavari ecological emergency requests. 8 weeks was not 11 days, but it was not 6 weeks in a low-priority queue followed by 4 months of procurement either. Eden reviewed the revised treaty from his office. He sent a note to Voss. "This is the standard we should be applying across all forest system homeworlds in the outer corridor. The Yavari framework is a model. I would like to discuss extending it." Voss replied, "I expected this note. Let us discuss it next week." On the last day of the remediation mission, Dr. Renata filed her completion report. It was thorough and precise, and included a supplementary section that had not been requested, which documented the ecological monitoring methodology that Saya had developed over 3 years, and which Dr. Renata recommended the Concord adopt as a standard for outer corridor forest system health assessment. The recommendation was adopted 6 months later. It became known in the Concord's Ecological Services Division as the Kailmora Protocol. The protocol required any research or survey operation within 30 kilometers of a registered forest system homeworld to include a root network health baseline in its initial assessment, so that future degradation would have a reference point. Saya did not know the protocol had been named after her settlement until Dr. Renata told her, in a personal message, 6 months after the mission ended. Saya wrote back, "I am glad the methodology is useful. Tell them the most important part is the baseline. You cannot see what is changing if you do not know what was there before. Eden received a personal communication from Saya on the one-year anniversary of the deployment authorization. It was in Yavari with a Concord Common Translation appended, which he suspected she had added because she knew he did not speak Yavari and she wanted him to have it in both. The Yavari portion was short. The translation read, "Admiral, the forest is healthy this year. The grapefruit trees are communicating the way they should. The canopy is managing the rain correctly. Kailmora is quiet in the way a forest is quiet when nothing is wrong with it." She wrote, "I found you in the outer forest 30 years ago because you were lost, and I knew the way. I did not know then that knowing the way was something I would spend my life doing. I did not know that you would spend 30 years doing something similar." She wrote, "I still have the notebook. The pages are blank but the cover is still green. I have been thinking about what to write in it for 30 years. I think I know now. I am going to write down what the forest sounds like when it is healthy, so that if it ever changes, there will be a record of what was there before." She was 8 years old the day she found him. She did not do it because it was significant. She did not know it was significant. She found a lost stranger at the base of a grapefruit tree in the rain, and she knew the way back to the settlement, and so she walked him out. It took 1 hour and 40 minutes. She checked behind her every few minutes to make sure he was still there. He was still there. He was still there 30 years later when her planet sent a request that went into a queue and sat for 11 days. And he read the name of the planet and he sat for a moment, and then he picked up his terminal and started closing the gap. Not because of strategic interest, not because of political weight, not because the Yavari homeworld was in the primary corridor network or had leverage or had anything the Concord needed. Because a child had walked him out of a forest, because she had checked behind her 12 times, because she had put the notebook in her carry sack the way you put something you intend to keep. And because he had told her mother, "Tell her I will remember the way she checked." He had remembered. He had been remembering for 30 years. And when the moment came, when the planet needed someone to read the request and close the gap, he did what you did when you had been keeping a 30-year debt to someone who had checked behind her 12 times to make sure you were still there. He was still there. He had always been still there. He intended to keep being still there. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you, genuinely. 21 episodes. And this one is the one I keep thinking about in terms of what the child understood without Noe. And gee, she understood it. She was 8. She found a stranger. She let him out. She checked on him 12 times. She did not know she was doing something that would matter for 30 years. She was doing the thing that was in front of her to do. That is what Eden did 30 years later. Not a grand gesture. Not a rescue mission assembled through official channels in the proper time. He read a queue on a Thursday morning because he reads queues on Thursday mornings. He saw a name. He remembered a forest and a child and a notebook with a green cover. And then he did the thing that was in front of him to do. She checked behind her 12 times. He checked back for 30 years. That is the whole of it. That is always the whole of it. If this one stayed with you, share it. If you want episode 22, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Stay human.